What if you're still asleep? Chapter 1. The Morning That Won't End. Lucas jolted awake to the blare of his alarm clock. 6:30 a.m., same as always. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting stripes across his cluttered bedroom. He groaned, rubbing his eyes, and swung his legs over the side of the bed. Another Monday, he muttered, stumbling to the bathroom. The mirror reflected his usual mess of brown hair and tired hazel eyes. Nothing special, nothing new. He brushed his teeth, splashed water on his face, and headed to the kitchen. The routine was muscle memory. Coffee maker on, toast in, radio humming the morning news. "Good morning, folks. Another chilly day ahead," the announcer chirped. Lucas sipped his coffee, burned his tongue, and winced, just like every Monday. Downstairs, he grabbed his jacket, locked the apartment door, and stepped into the crisp air. Mrs. Carter, his neighbor, watered her begonias across the hall. "Morning, Lucas," she called, her smile as bright as her yellow scarf. He waved back, heading for the bus stop. The 7:15 bus screeched to a halt right on time, and he climbed aboard, nodding to the driver, a bald guy with a permanent scowl. Work awaited. A desk. Job, emails, monotony. But something nagged at him as he stared out the bus window. The trees blurred past, the same red mailbox flashed by, and a kid in a blue hoodie kicked a soccer ball on the corner. Hadn't he seen that yesterday? No, Sundays were lazy, spent binge-watching shows. He shook it off. Déjà vu, that's all. The day dragged on. At 5:00 p.m., he clocked out, caught the bus home, and trudged back to his apartment. Mrs. Carter was still there, watering those same begonias. "Long day, huh?" she said, her scarf fluttering. Lucas frowned. "Didn't I see you this morning?" She laughed. "Every day's a fresh start, dear." Upstairs, he microwaved leftovers, flipped on the radio, static, then the weather. Another chilly day ahead. He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. That was the morning broadcast. He turned the dial, but every station echoed the same line. Weird. Shrugging, he finished dinner, crashed into bed, and let sleep take him. The alarm screamed. 6:30 a.m. Lucas sat up, blinking at the sunlight striping his room. Wait. He'd just done this. Coffee, toast, radio. Another chilly day ahead. Mrs. Carter waved, yellow scarf and all. The bus, the driver, the kid with the soccer ball, identical. "What's going on?" he muttered, pinching his arm. It hurt. He was awake. At work, his inbox reset, same emails from yesterday. He typed replies, but they vanished, replaced by the originals. By 5:00 p.m., he was back home, Mrs. Carter watering again. "Every day's a fresh start," she chirped. The radio looped. Another chilly day ahead. Lucas stared at his reflection in the microwave door. Same tired eyes, same messy hair. He went to bed, heart pounding. The alarm hit. 6:30 a.m. Again. Sunlight, coffee, Mrs. Carter, bus, work. The kid kicked the ball. The radio repeated. Lucas gripped the kitchen counter, breathing hard. "This isn't right," he said aloud. "I'm stuck." Chapter 2. Cracks in the routine. Lucas woke to the alarm, 6:30 a.m., sunlight slicing through the blinds. He didn't move at first, just lay there, staring at the ceiling. "Not again," he whispered. But the day rolled on, relentless. Coffee brewed, toast popped, the radio droned. Another chilly day ahead. He glared at it, tempted to smash it, but grabbed his mug instead. In the bathroom, he brushed his teeth, avoiding the mirror. Something about it felt off yesterday. Or was it today? He couldn't tell anymore. Finally, he looked, His reflection stared back, normal at first. Hazel eyes, messy hair. Then it blinked. He hadn't. Lucas stumbled back, heart racing. What the? He leaned closer. The reflection stayed still this time, but a faint crack snaked across the mirror's edge, barely visible. Shaking it off, he dressed and headed out. Mrs. Carter watered her begonias, her yellow scarf pristine. "Morning, Lucas," she said, but her smile twitched like a glitch on a screen. He froze. "You okay, Mrs. Carter?" She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Every day's a fresh start, dear." Her voice sounded flatter, rehearsed. The bus rolled up, the driver scowling as always. Lucas sat by the window, watching the kid kick the soccer ball. Same blue hoodie, same corner. But this time, the ball rolled into the street, and the kid didn't chase it. He just stood there, staring at Lucas, unblinking. A chill crawled up his spine. Work was a haze. Emails resetting, coworkers repeating lines. Busy day, huh? See you tomorrow. By 5 p.m., he was back home. Mrs. Carter watered again, her scarf fluttering. "Long day?" she asked, but her eyes lingered on him too long, sharp and strange. "Yeah," he muttered, hurrying inside. Downstairs, Mrs. Carter watered her begonias, her scarf a tangle of threads now, barely clinging to her neck. "Morning, Lucas," she called, but her voice split, high and low tones overlapping, like two people speaking at once. Her head tilted, too far, almost to her shoulder, and her eyes gleamed, dark and wet. "Every day's a fresh start," she added, but the words slurred, her smile flickering like a bad signal. Lucas nodded stiffly, hurrying past. The bus rolled up, the driver's scowl frozen, his hands gripping the wheel too tight. The kid on the corner stood in the street, soccer ball at his feet, staring with unblinking eyes, pupils dilated, swallowing the whites. Lucas sank into his seat, avoiding the window, but he felt the gaze boring into him. The trees blurred past. The red mailbox flashed, but the colors seemed off, too vivid, almost glowing. At work, the office buzzed with the same loop chatter. "Busy day, huh?" His coworkers moved in sync, heads turning toward him as he passed, their smiles sharp and stretched. His computer screen flickered, emails melting into gibberish, random letters, then static, then back to normal. He typed a test. "Help me." It vanished, replaced by the day's first email, unread again. Back home, Mrs. Carter waited, her watering can empty, dripping air. Long day? Her scarf was gone, her neck unnaturally smooth, and her eyes followed him like spotlights. "Yeah," he muttered, locking the door behind him. The radio sparked. Another chilly day ahead, then cut to static. That voice rasped through. "You're not asleep. They're watching." Louder this time, insistent. Lucas unplugged it, but the words hung in the air. He grabbed a notebook, scribbling what he remembered: coffee, mirror, Mrs. Carter, the kid. Each day shifted, warped. He wasn't reliving his life. He was trapped in something broken, something watching him. The alarm hit, 6:30 a.m. The mirror's cracks bled thicker shadows. Mrs. Carter's face twitched mid-sentence. The kid's stare burned. He sat on the bed, notebook trembling in his hands. "If I'm not asleep," he said aloud, "then what am I?" The room didn't answer, but the silence felt alive, listening. Chapter 5. The voice breaks. Through Lucas woke. 6:30 a.m., sunlight through the blinds, a loop he couldn't break. He moved mechanically now, coffee brewing, toast toasting, the radio chirping. Another chilly day ahead. But the announcer's voice glitched harder, words chopping into fragments. "Chill, day, ahead," before dissolving into static. Lucas gripped his mug, waiting for the shift, the crack in this endless rerun. The bathroom mirror was a mess of fractures, his reflection a kaleidoscope of wrongness. One shard showed him wide-eyed, another slack-jawed, a third with no face at, all just a blank oval. He leaned close, breath fogging the glass, and whispered, "Who's doing this?" The reflections blinked, all of them, out of sync, and the cracks pulsed, shadows wriggling like veins. He stumbled back, knocking over the soap dish, the clatter deafening in the silence. Outside, Mrs. Carter watered her begonias, though the can was bone dry. Her scarf was gone, her neck a smooth, featureless curve, and her smile stretched ear to ear, lips trembling. "Morning, Lucas." Her voice was a chorus now, multiple tones clashing, high and low, human and not. Her eyes locked on him, black pools reflecting nothing. "Every day's a fresh start," she croaked, head jerking sideways. He bolted for the bus, her stare trailing him like a weight. The driver's scowl was a mask, his hands fused to the wheel, knuckles white. The kid stood in the street, ball rolling away, staring with eyes that swallowed light. Lucas pressed against the window, watching the world blur. Trees too tall, mailbox too red, sky too flat. The bus jolted, and the kid's head snapped up, tracking him through the glass. Work was a nightmare. Co-workers' faces blurred at the edges, their looped lines. "Busy day, huh?" Slurring into a drone. His screen flickered, emails dissolving into static, then reforming with a single word. "Watching." He typed back, "Who?" The screen went black, then reset. Home again, Mrs. Carter stood motionless, her empty can dangling. "Long day?" Her voice buzzed, electric, and her eyes glowed, faintly. Lucas slammed the door, heart pounding. The radio flared. Another chilly day ahead. Then static roared, and the voice broke through, clearer, urgent. "You're not asleep. They're watching. You're not here." He froze, the words sinking in. "Not here?" he echoed, voice trembling. He grabbed the radio, shaking it. "Where am I? Tell me." Static answered, then silence. The alarm hit, 6:30 a.m. The mirror's shadows writhed, Mrs. Carter's face melted mid-smile, the kid's eyes followed him from the street. The radio crackled as he heated dinner. Another chilly day ahead. Then static, and a new voice cut through, low, distorted. "You're not asleep." Lucas dropped his plate, the crash echoing. He spun the dial. Nothing but static now. "Who's there?" he demanded. But the room stayed silent. In bed, he couldn't sleep, replaying the day. The mirror's crack, Mrs. Carter's stare, the kid's gaze, that voice. The alarm hit, 6:30 a.m. Again. He sat up, dread sinking in. Coffee, toast, radio, another chilly day ahead. The bathroom mirror's crack had grown, splitting his reflection's face in two. He touched it. The glass was cold, solid, but his mirrored hand twitched alone. Outside, Mrs. Carter watered, her smile tighter. "Morning, Lucas." Her scarf had a frayed edge now. The bus came. The kid stared, longer this time, head tilting. At work, his computer glitched, emails flickering before resetting. Back home, Mrs. Carter's eyes followed him. The radio hissed. "You're not asleep. They're watching." Lucas stood frozen. "Who's watching?" he whispered. The day looped again, and he knew. This wasn't just repetition. Something was breaking through. Chapter 3. The World Tilts. Lucas woke, 6:30 a.m., sunlight through the blinds. He didn't bother groaning this time. He just got up, moving through the motions like a ghost. Coffee brewed, toast browned, the radio chirped, another chilly day ahead. But the cheer felt hollow, a mask slipping. He gripped his mug, waiting for the crack in the routine to show itself. In the bathroom, the mirror's fracture had spread, jagged lines webbing across the glass, splitting his reflection into shards. His mirrored self moved slower now, brushing, its teeth out of sync. When he stopped, it kept going, then froze, staring back with eyes too wide, too still. Lucas backed away, pulse hammering. "This isn't real," he said, but his voice shook. Outside, Mrs. Carter watered her begonias, scarf frayed at the ends. "Morning, Lucas." Her tone was bright, but her head jerked slightly, like a puppet on loose strings. He nodded, avoiding her. Gaze. Those eyes lingered too long, unblinking now. The bus screeched up, the driver's scowl deeper, almost carved into his face. The kid on the corner kicked his ball, but it rolled into the street again, and he followed it this time, stopping in the road to stare at Lucas, hands limp at his sides. Work blurred by, emails looping, co-workers' voices echoing. Busy day, huh? But their smiles stretched too wide, teeth gleaming unnaturally. Lucas typed furiously, trying to break the cycle, but the screen flickered, words dissolving into static. He left at 5 p.m., the bus ride home a tunnel of repetition. Same trees, same red mailbox, same kid watching from the curb. Mrs. Carter waited, watering can dripping. Long day? Her scarf was unraveling, threads dangling like spider silk, and her stare pierced through him. "Yeah," he muttered, rushing inside. The radio crackled to life without him touching it. Another chilly day ahead. Then the static surged, and that voice rasped again. "You're not asleep. They're watching." He yanked the plug, but the sound lingered, echoing in his ears. "Who's they?" he yelled, spinning around. The apartment was still, too still. He paced, mind racing. The mirror's cracks, the kid's stare, Mrs. Carter's glitchy smile. Was this a dream? He pinched himself, slapped his face. Pain bloomed, sharp and real. "I'm awake," he insisted, but doubt gnawed at him. The alarm hit, 6:30 a.m. Again. The mirror's cracks now bled shadows, dark tendrils curling in the glass. Mrs. Carter's scarf hung in tatters, her eyes black pits. The kid stood in the street, ball forgotten, head cocked at an impossible angle. The radio hissed. "They're watching." Lucas gripped the counter, a realization dawning. This wasn't his day repeating. It was something else's. Chapter 4. The pieces don't fit. Lucas woke to the alarm, 6:30 a.m., sunlight slicing through the blinds like a broken record. He didn't flinch this time, just sat up, staring at the familiar stripes on his wall. The routine kicked in. Coffee brewed with a gurgle, toast popped with a faint ding, the radio hummed to life. Another chilly day ahead. But the announcer's voice cracked mid-sentence, a static burst swallowing the words. Lucas didn't react. He was past surprise, teetering on the edge of numb acceptance. In the bathroom, he faced the mirror. The cracks had multiplied, a jagged web that fractured his reflection into dozens of mismatched pieces. His eyes too big in one shard, his mouth stretched wide in another. He raised a hand. The reflections followed, but some lagged, others twitched. Ahead. One shard showed him smiling, though his real face stayed grim. "What are you?" he whispered, tapping the glass. It rippled like water, the cracks pulsing faintly, and he jerked back. Lucas sat on the floor, notebook open. "Not asleep, not here," he muttered, scribbling. The world was unraveling. Cracks, glitches, stairs. He wasn't living this day. He was caught in it, a fly in a web, and something, Someone was pulling the strings. Chapter 6. The Truth Slips. In Lucas woke, 6:30 a.m., sunlight carving the room into familiar stripes. He didn't fight it anymore, just rose, letting the loop carry him. Coffee bubbled, toast popped, the radio sputtered. Another chilly day ahead. But the announcer's voice broke entirely now, a garbled mess of syllables. And chill day. Before, static swallowed it. Lucas stood still, listening, waiting for the distortion to speak. The mirror was a shattered puzzle, his reflection a chaos of parts. Eyes in one piece, mouth in another, some shards blank, others showing him screaming though. He stood silent. He pressed a hand to the glass. It sank in, cold and thick like jelly, and the reflections recoiled, mouths gaping soundlessly. "You're not me," he said, pulling back. The cracks pulsed, shadows spilling out, curling toward him before snapping back. Outside, Mrs. Carter didn't move, just stood empty, her neck a smooth blank slate. "Morning, Lucas." Her voice was a screech, layered with static, and her smile split her face, teeth too many, too sharp. Her eyes shone, twin voids tracking him. "Every day's a fresh start," she rasped, body twitching like a marionette. Lucas ran, her gaze burning into his back. The bus screeched up, the driver a statue, scowl etched deep. The kid waited in the street, ball gone, staring with eyes that swallowed the world, black, endless, pulling at him. Lucas gripped his seat, the scenery warping, trees bending, mailbox pulsing red, sky rippling like a pond. The bus shuddered, and the kid's lips moved, mouthing something he couldn't hear. Work was a fever dream, co-workers' faces smeared, voices overlapping. "Busy day, huh?" His screen flashed. "Watching you." He typed, "Where am I?" The answer flickered, "Not here." Then black. Home again, Mrs. Carter stood rigid, her form flickering, skin to static and back. "Long day?" Her voice buzzed, eyes glowing. The radio screamed to life. "You're not asleep. They're watching. You're not alive." Lucas dropped to his knees, the words a punch. "Not alive?" he whispered, clutching his chest. His heart beat, didn't it? The alarm hit, 6:30 a.m. Shadows bled from the mirror. Mrs. Carter's face dissolved mid-sentence. The kid mouthed silent words. He stared at his hands, trembling. "I'm dead," he said, the truth clawing free. This wasn't his life. It was limbo, and they were watching him sink. Chapter 7. The echoes grow louder. Lucas woke, 6:30 a.m., sunlight slashing through the blinds in mocking familiarity. He didn't bother sitting up right away, just lay there, staring at the ceiling as the loop's weight pressed down. The alarm's blare faded, replaced by the gurgle of the coffee maker kicking on, the faint pop of the toaster downstairs. He dragged himself out of bed, feet heavy, mind buzzing with the radio's last words. "You're not alive." In the kitchen, he poured coffee, the mug warm in his hands, but the heat felt distant, like touching it through a glove. The radio crackled to life. "Another chilly day ahead," the announcer's voice splintering into static mid-word, "chill, day, before cutting out. Lucas waited, staring at the speaker, and the distortion returned, sharper now. "You're not asleep. They're watching. You're not alive." The words looped, overlapping, a chorus of warped whispers filling the room. He slammed the off button, but the sound lingered, vibrating in the walls. The bathroom mirror was a battlefield of cracks, his reflection shattered into a dozen jagged pieces. Eyes too wide here, mouth twisted there, some shards blank, others flickering with motion he didn't make. He leaned in, breath fogging the glass, and hissed, "If I'm dead, why am I here?" The reflections twitched, one smiling grotesquely, another blinking alone. Shadows pulsed in the cracks, reaching out like fingers before retreating. He stumbled, back, knocking the sink with a clang that echoed too long. Outside, Mrs. Carter stood frozen, her watering can dangling, empty. Her neck was a smooth, featureless plane, her face a glitch. Eyes black voids, mouth stretching into a grin too wide for her skull. "Morning, Lucas." Her voice screeched, a mix of tones grinding together, and her head jerked, nearly flipping. Backward. "Every day's a fresh start," she crooned, her body shuddering as if pulled by unseen strings. Lucas bolted past, her stare searing into him, unblinking and alive. The bus screeched to a halt, the driver's scowl a carved mask, hands locked on the wheel. The kid on the corner stood motionless, soccer ball gone, his eyes swallowing light, black pits that seemed to pull the air around them. Lucas sank into his seat, the world outside warping harder, trees stretching into claws, the red mailbox glowing like a coal, the sky rippling with faint cracks. The kid's head tilted, lips moving silently, and Lucas strained to read them. "You're not." At work, the office hummed with looped voices. "Busy day, huh?" Co-workers' faces blurred, edges melting, their smiles sharp and predatory. His screen flickered, words forming in the static. "Not alive, watching you." He typed, "Why me?" The screen pulsed. "You fell." Then reset. Back home, Mrs. Carter waited, her form flickering, skin dissolving into static, then snapping back. "Long day?" Her voice buzzed like a broken speaker, eyes glowing red now. The radio roared, "You're not alive. They see you." Lucas grabbed it, hurling it against the wall. It shattered, but the voice echoed on. "You fell." He sank to the floor, hands shaking. "Fell?" he whispered, mind racing. A memory flickered. Rain, a bridge, headlights, but it slipped away. The alarm hit, 6:30 a.m. Shadows writhed in the mirror. Mrs. Carter's face melted. The kid's lips moved. "You fell." Lucas clutched his head. Dead. Trapped. Watched. The truth was clawing closer. Chapter 8. The World Phrase. Apart, Lucas woke, 6:30 a.m., sunlight cutting through the blinds like a blade he couldn't dodge. He rose without a word, the loop a chain around his neck. Coffee brewed, toast popped, the motions automatic, but his hands felt numb, the mug's warmth a lie. The radio sparked. Another chilly day ahead, the voice fracturing, day, aha, then collapsing into static. He didn't touch it this time, just waited, and the distortion hissed. "You're not asleep. They're watching. You fell." The words burrowed into him, sharp and cold. In the bathroom, the mirror was a ruin. Cracks so dense his reflection barely held together, a patchwork of distorted Lucases staring back. One shard showed him screaming, mouth wide, though he stood silent. Another had no eyes, just hollow sockets. He pressed a finger to the glass and it sank in, the surface rippling like oil. The reflections recoiled, some turning away, others reaching out with trembling hands. Shadows surged in the cracks, thick and alive, brushing his real fingers before snapping back. "Fell where?" he demanded. The mirror pulsed, but no answer came. Outside, Mrs. Carter didn't water anymore, just stood can dangling, her form unraveling. Her neck was gone, head floating above her shoulders, and her face flickered, skin to static to skin. "Morning, Lucas." Her voice was a shriek, a dozen tones clashing, and her smile split her head, teeth jagged and endless. "Every day's a fresh start," she rasped, her body twitching violently, arms bending backward. Lucas ran, her glowing red eyes tracking him like lasers. The bus arrived, the driver a statue, scowl frozen, eyes unseeing, hands welded to the wheel. The kid stood, in the street, no ball. His head cocked at an impossible angle, eyes black voids that sucked in light. His lips moved faster now, mouthing, "You fell. You fell." Lucas pressed against the window, the world outside fraying, trees drooping like melted wax, the mailbox bleeding red into the pavement, the sky cracking with faint, glowing lines. Work was chaos. Co-workers' faces dissolved mid-sentence, voices slurring, "Busy day, huh?" into a garbled hum. His screen flashed. "You fell. They watch." He typed, "Fell where?" The answer blinked. "Down." Then black. Home again, Mrs. Carter flickered in and out, her body a static storm, eyes blazing. "Long day?" Her voice buzzed, electric, and her head spun, facing backward. The radio screamed, unplugged, "You're not alive. They see you fall." Lucas grabbed a chair, smashing it against the wall, but the voice looped louder. "Fall. Fall." He collapsed, memories clawing free. Rain-slicked roads, a bridge's edge, a scream cut short. "I fell," he gasped, hands digging into his hair. "I died." The alarm hit, 6:30 a.m. The mirror bled shadows. Mrs. Carter's form shattered. The kid's eyes swallowed him. The world wasn't his anymore. It was theirs, and they were pulling him deeper. Chapter 9. The shadows take shape. Lucas woke, 6:30 a.m., sunlight slashing the room, a prison of repetition. He didn't resist, just stood, the loop a tide he couldn't fight. Coffee brewed, toast popped, but the smells were faint, the tastes bland, like echoes of sensation. The radio flared. Another chilly day ahead. The voice a broken stutter. Chill, before static roared. He stared, waiting, and the words cut through. "You're not asleep. They're watching. You fell down." Clearer now, a knife in his chest. The mirror was a chaos of cracks, his reflection a nightmare collage. Eyes darting in one shard, mouth screaming in another, some blank, others showing him falling, arms flailing against a dark void. He slammed a fist against it. The glass rippled, shadows exploding outward, coiling around his arm before retreating. "Fell where?" he shouted. A shard pulsed, showing rain, a bridge, a car spinning, then black. Outside, Mrs. Carter stood rigid, her body a flickering mess, skin peeling into static, head floating, eyes twin red flames. "Morning, Lucas," her voice screeched, a cacophony of tones, and her smile stretched beyond her face, teeth gleaming like blades. "Every day's a fresh start," she hissed, limbs twisting backward, snapping audibly. Lucas sprinted past, her gaze a heat on his neck. The bus rolled up, the driver, a mannequin, scowl carved, hands fused, eyes blind. The kid waited, head tilted, eyes black abysses, lips mouthing, "You fell down." The world outside unraveled, trees collapsing into goo, the mailbox melting, the sky splitting with glowing cracks. Lucas gripped the seat, the kid's stare pulling. At him, a void he couldn't escape. Work dissolved. Co-workers' faces dripped like wax, voices a droning hum. "Busy day, huh?" His screen pulsed. "You fell down, they see." He typed, "Who are they?" The answer flickered. "Use." Then static. Home again. Mrs. Carter was a shadow-streaked blur, her form barely human, eyes blazing. "Long day?" Her voice buzzed, head spinning, fully around. The radio screamed, "You fell. They watch. Lucas tore at his hair, memories flooding. Rain, a bridge, a crash, darkness. I'm dead, he choked. This is limbo. The alarm hit. 6:30 a.m. Shadows poured from the mirror, Mrs. Carter dissolved. The kid's eyes grew. He stood trembling. They're here, he whispered, feeling them in the cracks, the static, the stairs. Watching, waiting, pulling him down. Chapter 10. The Edge of the Void. Lucas woke, 6:30 a.m., sunlight slicing through the blinds like a cruel joke. He didn't move at first, just lay there, the weight of the loop crushing him. The coffee maker gurgled downstairs, the toaster dinged, but he stayed still, listening as the radio sputtered to life. Another chilly day ahead. The voice broke, into static instantly, a garbled mess of sound, and then the now familiar rasp cut through. You're not asleep. They're watching. You fell down. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a declaration, etched into his bones. He stumbled to the bathroom, the mirror a shattered wreck. His reflection was chaos. Eyes wild in one shard, mouth gaping in another. Some pieces blank, others showing, him falling, tumbling into a black abyss. He pressed both hands to the glass, sinking into its cold, liquid surface. Shadows erupted, wrapping his arms, pulling him forward until his face nearly touched the cracks. "Show me," he yelled. The reflections froze, then shifted. A bridge in the rain, a car spinning, headlights blinding him, and then nothing. He yanked free, gasping, the shadows snapping back into the mirror like coiled snakes. Outside, Mrs. Carter stood as a flickering ruin, her body half static, half flesh, her head floating above a necklace stump. "Morning, Lucas." Her voice was a piercing wail, a dozen tones clashing, and her smile stretched impossibly, teeth jagged and endless. "Every day's a fresh start," she screeched, her arms snapping backward, bones cracking audibly. Her eyes blazed red, pinning him in place, and he ran, her gaze a burning weight on his back. The bus screeched up, the driver a lifeless shell, scowl, carved into his face, hands fused to the wheel, eyes staring nowhere. The kid on the corner stood rigid, his head twisted fully backward, black eyes swallowing light, lips mouthing, "You fell down." The world outside was a nightmare. Trees melted into sludge. The red mailbox bled into the street. The sky shattered with glowing cracks that pulsed like veins. Lucas clutched the seat, the kid's void eyes pulling at him, whispering truths he couldn't unhear. At work, the office was a melting wreck. Co-workers' faces dripped like candle wax, their looped words. "Busy day, huh?" A slurring drone that buzzed in his skull. His screen flared. "You fell down. We watch." He typed, "What do you want?" The answer blinked. "You." Then the screen went black, static hissing from every corner of the room. Back home, Mrs. Carter flickered violently, her form dissolving into static, eyes twin fires. "Long day?" Her voice was a buzzsaw, her head spinning 360 degrees. The radio screamed, unplugged, "You fell. We see you." Lucas didn't fight it this time. He stood, facing the wall, memories crashing in. Rain, a bridge, a skid, a fall into darkness. "I died," he said, voice steady now. "This isn't life. It's yours." The alarm hit. 6:30 a.m. The mirror bled shadows thick as tar. Mrs. Carter's form collapsed into static. The kid's eyes grew impossibly large. Lucas didn't flinch. He walked to the mirror, pressing his hands in deep, letting the shadows coil around him. "Take me then," he said, stepping forward. The glass swallowed him whole, and the world went black. Chapter 11. The Other Side, Lucas didn't wake, not like before. There was no alarm, no sunlight, just a vast, humming darkness stretching in every direction. He stood, or thought he stood, on nothing, a faint shimmer beneath his feet, the only hint of a surface. The air buzzed, alive with that familiar hum, and he felt it in his chest, his bones, his soul. "I'm here," he said, voice echoing into the void. "You've got me. Now what?" A flicker sparked ahead, a screen floating in the black, glowing with a faint, sickly light. It showed his apartment, sunlight through the blinds, coffee brewing, toast popping. But Lucas wasn't there. The radio crackled. Another chilly day ahead, clear and unbroken now. Mrs. Carter watered her begonias outside, scarf pristine, smile normal. The kid kicked his soccer ball, laughing. The world moved on, without him. More screens appeared, dozens, then hundreds, surrounding him in a dome of flickering images. Some showed his looped day, coffee, bus, work. But others were new. The bridge in the rain, his car spinning, the fall into the river below. He saw himself climb out, soaked, shivering, staggering home. Then another screen, him collapsing on the floor, eyes open, still. "I didn't make it," he whispered, the truth solidifying. "I died that night." The hum grew, and shadows emerged, not from the screens, but from the void itself. Tall, thin, faceless, they drifted closer, their edges sharp against the dark. "You're them," Lucas said, stepping back. "The ones watching." They didn't speak, but the hum became words in his mind. "You fell. We caught you." A screen flared brighter, showing his apartment again, but different. The walls shimmered, the light pulsed, and Mrs. Carter stood inside, her eyes black, her smile too wide. The kid peered through the window, head tilted, lips, mouthing, "You're here." Lucas spun, facing the shadows. "Caught me? For what?" The hum vibrated. "To see. To stay." The screens pulsed, showing more, strangers' homes, streets, lives, all flickering with static, all watched by those same black eyes. "You're not just watching me," he realized, voice trembling. "You're watching everyone." The shadows closed in, their touch cold, unyielding, and the screens multiplied, filling the void with endless loops. Lucas stumbled, but the ground held. Or they did. He sank to his knees, staring at his old life on the screens, pristine now, reset without him. Then a new screen blinked on, his apartment, sunlight through the blinds, coffee brewing. A figure sat at the table, him, or something like him, smiling softly. "Morning," it said, voice his own but smoother, eyes glinting with a strange light. The shadows tightened their grip, the hum swelling. Lucas looked up, whispering, "I'm not asleep, but I'm not awake either." The figure on the screen turned, meeting his gaze through the void, and smiled wider. The screens flared white, the hum drowned everything, and Lucas felt himself slipping, not falling, but fading, into something he couldn't name.